In 1932, a woman walked into Jung's Zurich practice with the peculiar calm that follows catastrophe. She'd been exiled 6 months earlier, banished from the only home she'd ever known, not for committing a crime, but for naming a fact everyone could see, and no one dared say aloud: her father was drinking more. One sentence at a dinner table, and the room froze. Her mother stood, voice clipped. "How dare you embarrass this family? Get out." Doors closed. Siblings went silent. Cousins learned a new phrase: don't be like her. She arrived asking the question that corrodes the spirit from the inside. If it's true, why am I the one being punished? Jung listened, then said what almost no one says to the person the family has agreed to sacrifice. You are not the problem. You are the immune system. Every family maintains two sets of rules: the explicit, be respectful, work hard. Keep the peace, and the implicit, don't mention father's drinking, don't name mother's affairs, pretend everything is fine. Most nervous systems adapt to the implicit contract by dulling perception. Yours didn't, it refused. That refusal is not rebellion, it's accuracy. Your body registered the discrepancy between what was said and what was true, like a fever rising to kill an infection. The family called you dramatic. Your physiology called it emergency. This is the first mechanism of the black sheep immune detection. In healthy families, sensitivity is an asset because truth can be metabolized. In fragile families, sensitivity is a threat because truth would require change. The black sheep's circuitry runs hotter. It notices the tremor under polished words, the smile that never reaches the eyes, the stiffness in a room that insists it's relaxed. You grew up feeling crazy, not because you saw what wasn't there, but because everyone else pretended not to see what was there. The family's adaptation was denial. Yours was perception. And perception in an environment built on pretending gets labeled disloyal. At the dinner that ended her childhood, she didn't accuse. She observed. Father's been drinking more lately. The table went still, not because the information was shocking, but because the contract was broken. The contract is how the system survives. The person who tears it is recast as the problem the moment the words leave their mouth. She wasn't punished for speaking truth. She was punished for ending the ritual in which everyone performs wellness so the system doesn't have to heal. The immune mechanism fires automatically a symptom. Her sentence appears to restore integrity. The system responds by attacking the symptom. When did you first feel like something was off? Jung asked. Always, she said. Since childhood. The tension under polite conversation. The way my mother's jaw locked when my father poured a drink. I assumed it was me, that I was too sensitive. You assumed wrong, Jung said evenly. You were sensing reality everyone else had gone numb to. If your family has ever told you you're too sensitive, hear this. You're accurately sensitive in a system that normalized numbness. Without you, the transmission continues. Patterns pass quietly from one generation to the next. Alcohol becomes anxiety, becomes silence, becomes illness. Different names for the same refusal to look. The black sheep interrupts that transfer by existing. The interruption is not optional, it is constitutional. Your presence, your perception forces the system to choose evolve or expel. Expulsion is easier, which brings us to the second mechanism, scapegoating. 3 months into therapy, she asked the question that keeps scapegoats awake at 3 a.m. Why do they hate me? I am their daughter, their sister. Why am I the enemy for one true sentence? They don't hate you, Jung said. They hate what you represent reality they have organized their lives around avoiding. To keep avoiding it, they must make you the problem. The family myth had already circulated through cousins and community. Everything was fine until she started causing drama. She's always been difficult, oversensitive, stirring up trouble. If she would just stop bringing up the past, we could all be happy. She repeated the lines mechanically. Repetition turns fiction into felt truth if you hear it enough. Notice what the story achieves, Jung said. It erases my father's drinking as the problem, she whispered, realization dawning. It replaces it with me. Exactly. The infection vanishes. The alarm becomes the disease. The scapegoat mechanism allows the family to breathe without changing. We're not dysfunctional. We had one bad apple. After she was cast out, her mother told relatives, "There's such peace in the house now." Of course there was. The siren was unplugged. The fire still burned. Scapegoating is the system's most efficient technology. It does three things at once. First, it protects the symptom that holds the system together, father's drinking, mother's secrecy, the pact of silence, by relocating the discomfort to a human container. Second, it reorganizes shame away from the parental center and into the child who spoke. Third, it creates a moral narrative, disloyal, ungrateful, unstable, that justifies the exile and recruits allies to enforce it. The black sheep becomes the family's wastebasket. Whatever cannot be faced gets thrown into them. "You're angry," says the parent who is seething. "You're tearing us apart," says the sibling who learned to survive by smoothing over fractures. You carry the shadow not because you generate more darkness, but because you allow less pretending. This is why scapegoats change their posture in therapy when they first hear the sentence, "You are not the problem. You are the evidence of a problem." To accept that sentence is to begin the slow excavation of internalized blame. 28 years of "I am defective" becomes the recognition I was assigned defectiveness so the system could stay intact. The first step of liberation is semantic, separate what belongs to you from what was dumped into you. The second step is somatic, notice how your body learned to carry other people's discomfort. Tight throat, clenched gut, hyper-vigilant scanning for shifts in tone so you could put it down. Families don't relinquish a scapegoat easily. A system prefers a known equilibrium, even if it is destructive to an unknown reorganization that might heal. The day the scapegoat refuses to carry the projection, the system destabilizes. That destabilization feels to the system like threat. Threat demands escalation. It arrived for her in the 11th month as a letter with an ultimatum disguised as, "Love, come to Christmas and behave, or you are no longer our daughter." She brought it to Jung's office with steady hands and trembling voice. "I told my mother I wouldn't attend unless father gets help. She called me cruel. She says I'm destroying the family. Now she's giving me a deadline." "Your boundary shattered their equilibrium," Jung said. "As long as you carried the blame, the structure held. Remove the load-bearing lie and the frame creaks." He named it for her destabilizer. That's the third mechanism. When the immune system refuses sedation and the scapegoat returns, the shadow the family experiences withdrawal. Guilt calls first. "How can you do this to us after all we've done for you?" followed by threat. "If you don't comply, you're out," then gaslighting, "You're remembering it wrong. It was never that bad." Siblings chime in, trained by years of survival. "Be reasonable. Let it go. We're fine. Watch the logic. A reasonable boundary, 'I will not participate unless help is sought,' gets inverted into cruelty. Your insistence on reality becomes the source of chaos. Why? Because if your boundary is reasonable, their denial is unreasonable, and the entire system must restructure. Father, sober mother, stop enabling siblings, admit complicity. That's too much work, too much shame, too much change. It is simpler to declare you hysterical and hold Christmas. The destabilizer is accused of causing what they are merely revealing. You did not create the fracture. You named it. The system blames the tremor on the seismograph. She wrote back carefully, "I love you. I will not pretend. My boundary stands." The reply arrived in a day, "You are no longer my daughter." She read those words aloud and looked up with eyes that had crossed a line you don't uncross. "I knew this would happen," she said, "but it still feels like dying." "It is a death," Jung answered. "The part of you trained to keep them comfortable is dying, and the person who can live in reality is being born. If you're here, recognize where you are in the arc. Immune detection is not madness. Scapegoating is not proof you are wrong. Destabilization is the system's panic in the face of required change. You are not destroying anything that was whole. You are refusing to collaborate with what was already destroying the family from within. There is a moment in every black sheep's story when the question changes from, "How do I make them see?" to, "How do I live if they never do?" That is the hinge on which freedom swings. She reached it in the 18th month. She did not come in defiant or broken. She sat differently, quiet, aligned, as if a secret weight had been laid down. "I'm not going back," she said. "Not because I hate them. Because I finally understand I can't end a pattern from inside the ritual that maintains it. I have to end it by living differently myself." Jung nodded once. "Then your role changes," he said, "from alarm to architect. This is the fourth mechanism beginning to form, but before we name it, we have to anchor what's already happened. If you are the black sheep, your nervous system is not a flaw. It is the family's last functioning smoke detector. Your exile is not proof you were wrong. It is proof the house preferred burning to admitting there was a fire. The guilt you feel is borrowed. The shame you carry was assigned. The loneliness is real, but it is not empty. It is fertile. It is the quiet in which a person who was trained to edit herself for group comfort learns to speak in her own voice without permission. There is, however, one more trap that must be avoided on the threshold between scapegoat and something else, the savior impulse. The system that expelled you will still live inside you as a reflex to rescue it. You will want to explain a little better. Write the perfect letter, attend one holiday to keep the door open. Notice the pattern. Rescue fantasies are extensions of the old contract. If I suffer correctly, they will love me. The contract is void. Love that depends on your silence is not love. Participation that requires your amnesia is not belonging. When she finally understood this, her breathing changed. The body tells the truth before the mind agrees. She began to document what happened, not as revenge, but as record. Dates, incidents, words. Not for court, for clarity. Gaslighting evaporates in the presence of paper. When doubt returned, maybe it wasn't that bad, she read her own sentences and remembered. Documentation is not drama, it is medicine. It validates the injury so the injured can heal. If your story looks like hers, understand the architecture at work. Families that depend on denial stabilize by burning a member at the stake of truth. Breaking the spell requires the chosen one to survive the fire without returning to the village to prove survival. You will be called cold for choosing reality over ritual. You will be accused of cruelty for refusing performances that harmed you. You will be told you're destroying the family while you stand outside watching it destroy itself. Hold your ground. When the system declares that love is only available to those who lie, exile is not punishment. Exile is the first honest room you have ever stood in, and standing there alone but intact, you will feel something that is not fury, and not triumph. It is clarity. The moment when the person you have always been steps forward and says, "My life is mine now." 18 months after her exile, she returned to Jung's office with a different presence, calm, grounded, luminous, in a way pain can polish a person. "I'm not going back," she said. "Not because I want revenge, but because I finally understand. I can't heal what still feeds on my silence. The only way to stop the pattern is to stop playing the part." Jung smiled slightly. This was the pivot he'd been waiting for. "Then you have reached the fourth mechanism," he said. "You've become the pattern breaker. Breaking a pattern doesn't mean forgetting it. It means tracing its architecture back to origin and refusing to reenact it." She began to map her family line, a father who drank a grandfather, who drank each generation, insisting they were different while repeating the same cycle. Alongside the addiction ran the real contagion silence. Her grandmother had been labeled difficult, her great-aunt estranged for causing trouble. They too had tried to speak and been shunned. "I'm not the first black sheep," she realized. "I'm the first who stayed awake long enough to finish the sentence." Jung nodded. "You are the culmination of their unfinished attempts. The pattern ends where awareness begins." From then on, she lived like an anthropologist of her own instincts. Each time she felt the pull to overwork, when sad her mother's method of numbing, she paused. Each time she softened a boundary to keep peace, her siblings' survival strategy, she caught herself. "Is this mine or theirs?" she'd ask. "Do I want this reaction, or is it inherited?" Each small pause was an act of rebellion against the ancestral autopilot. Conscious interruption, Jung called it, catching the program as it runs and choosing otherwise. She began to speak, even when her voice trembled, to allow herself to be seen as difficult when she was merely clear. Every act of honest expression rewrote a generational script. "Each time I tell the truth," she said, "I feel my grandmother standing behind me whispering, 'Thank you for saying what I couldn't.'" Documentation became her second discipline. She wrote the real story, not the family's version edited for outsiders, but the unvarnished sequence of events, the drinking, the enabling, the blame. On paper, the gaslighting dissolved. What once sounded like exaggeration revealed itself as evidence. For future generations, it would stand as a record of reality. "When they say it wasn't that bad," she told Jung, "I can show that it was." He reminded her that naming truth is never vengeance. It's vaccination. The record protects whoever comes next from catching the same disease of denial. But there was still grief, to metabolize the grief of the family she would never have, of the apologies that would never arrive. She learned to mourn not only what was lost, but what never existed, a mother who could face her pain, a father who could be seen, siblings who could choose truth over loyalty. "I'm not giving up on them," she told Jung. "I'm giving up on the fantasy that my healing will heal them." He answered, "That is the final severing of the spell. You were raised to confuse rescue with love. Now you know love doesn't require your suffering." The pattern breaker's work is interior, invisible. She wasn't trying to fix the family anymore. She was ensuring the dysfunction wouldn't pass through her. Her nervous system, once tuned to detect danger, was learning safety without waiting for permission. She practiced small joys, silence without dread, solitude without exile, laughter that didn't depend on someone else's mood. Healing was no longer a reaction to trauma, but the quiet construction of a life built in daylight. She began mentoring others who felt like family exiles. "They think they're broken," she said, "but they're just accurate." Then came the letter that would confirm the final mechanism Jung had hinted at, but never named: liberation. 2 years after she left, her younger sister wrote, "After you left, I defended them. I said you were wrong. But last month, father was arrested for drunk driving. Mother still denies it. I finally see. You were right. What you did freed me. I'm leaving too. She cried as she read it aloud. I thought leaving was selfish, she whispered. Now I see it was the most loving thing I could have done. Jung called this the liberation mechanism, when the black sheep who saves herself unknowingly opens a door for others to walk through. It works like an antidote diffusing through generations. You don't heal the family by staying and absorbing its poison. You heal it by leaving and proving survival is possible. Her departure shattered the core myth. If you leave, you'll be destroyed. She left. She wasn't destroyed. The lie lost power. Over the next 3 years, her brother joined Alcoholics Anonymous. A cousin stopped drinking. Extended relatives began to whisper questions they'd never dared to ask. The family's denial cracked not through confrontation, but through contrast. One free person makes captivity look optional. The paradox of liberation is that it happens quietly. You think you're escaping alone, but others are watching, recalibrating their courage by your example. The black sheep's absence becomes the mirror that shows the family its shape. Without their scapegoat to absorb the darkness, they must finally face it or collapse under its weight. Some evolve, some don't. But evolution was never your assignment to manage. Your task was to end the inheritance of pain within yourself, to stop being the container for everything they refused to feel. She no longer waited for letters or closure. They gave me no choice but to find freedom, she said, and I'm grateful. Being the black sheep used to feel like a curse. Now it feels like a calling. Jung agreed. Every system that survives owes its future to the one who refused to lie. The mechanisms complete themselves: immune detection, scapegoat, destabilizer, pattern breaker, liberator, the full cycle of transformation. Her story was never about exile. It was about evolution. If you've been branded the problem, the rebel, the too sensitive one, understand what your nervous system has been doing. You are the family's alarm, not its disease. When the alarm sounds, the sleepers curse it. Let them. Your task isn't to silence the alarm. It's to step outside the burning house and build something honest where smoke can no longer pass for air. The transformation of the black sheep is not a single moment of enlightenment, but a gradual migration from survival to creation. Once she left the family's gravitational field, the silence that used to terrify her became a kind of soil. At first it felt empty. Then it began to fill with her own voice, one that had never been allowed to exist without apology. Jung called this stage individuation in solitude, the process of reorganizing a psyche around truth instead of approval. He warned that the greatest danger at this point isn't relapse into the old system. It's the temptation to create a new system of self-punishment in its place. The mind trained for crisis will search for familiar chaos. You may find yourself drawn to friends, lovers, or workplaces that mirror your family's dynamics because part of you still equates suffering with safety. Recognize the pattern the body feels what the mind has not yet named. If your stomach tightens around someone's silence the same way it did at your childhood dinner table, that's memory disguised as instinct. The pattern breaker must become a pattern watcher, catching repetition the moment it starts to rebuild the prison in new architecture. As she learned to detect these echoes, her sensitivity, once pathologized, became navigation. What used to overwhelm her now guided her. When she felt that subtle dissonance between words and energy, she didn't adapt to it. She adjusted her proximity. I used to think I was rejecting people, she told Jung. Now I understand I'm rejecting patterns. He smiled. Boundaries are love with direction. Still, she asked the question every survivor of exile eventually faces: if I'm free, why do I still feel lonely? Jung explained that loneliness is not absence, it's detox. You've lived inside the noise of collective denial. When it stops, your body needs time to hear silence as peace. The black sheep's nervous system has been tuned to the frequency of crisis. Calm feels foreign until it's practiced. Recovery is repetition in the opposite direction, choosing stillness again and again until safety becomes recognizable. Months later, she wrote in her journal, "I thought liberation meant leaving. Now I see it also means staying with myself when I feel empty, staying with truth. When it's inconvenient, staying with peace when chaos calls." That line marked the transition from survivor to creator. Jung called this the shift from reactive to generative consciousness. Once the psyche stops using energy to defend against lies, it begins using that energy to build meaning. This building takes form quietly. She began mentoring other outcasts, those who sat in therapy rooms whispering the same confession: "I spoke the truth and lost everyone." Her first response was always the same: "Then you spoke it at the right volume." They would laugh through tears, not realizing that laughter itself was evidence of healing the body, remembering that truth doesn't have to hurt forever. Jung once said, "The most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely." The black sheep, by living authentically after rejection, models that acceptance in real time. The ripple of that authenticity extends beyond psychology. 2 years after her departure, her sister's letter had proved it: liberation spreads by example. Jung saw this phenomenon repeatedly. When one member individuates, the system reorganizes around their absence. Some members adapt by evolving, others by hardening, but adaptation begins regardless. The family cannot return to its original equilibrium because the projection field has been pierced. The lie has lost its host. Her brother's call confirmed it further. He confessed that he had joined a recovery group and recognized his own drinking patterns. "I used to think you were exaggerating," he said. "Now I hear myself using the same excuses Father did." She listened, heart steady, and understood what Jung meant when he said that healing is never local. Every act of truth-telling sends shockwaves through the collective unconscious. Her leaving had rewritten possibility inside the family's code. And yet Jung warned her and every black sheep against the Savior's relapse. "Do not mistake resonance for responsibility," he said. "Their awakening belongs to them. Yours is already complete." She nodded. The Savior impulse she'd learned was just a more polished version of the scapegoat's contract. "If I suffer correctly, they will see the light." But truth doesn't require witnesses. It requires continuity. By her 3rd year in analysis, she stopped bringing letters from home. "They still don't speak to me," she said, "but I no longer measure healing by contact. I measure it by clarity." Jung observed that she no longer reacted to her family's silence. She reflected it. That distinction marked the birth of individuation's final phase: internal authority. The black sheep no longer needs validation from the herd, because the herd's blindness has lost its gravitational pull. From this perspective, even anger transformed. What used to feel like rage now felt like recognition, the realization that she had inherited generations of unprocessed pain and had chosen to metabolize it. "They gave me poison," she said quietly, "and I learned how to make medicine." Jung wrote in his notes that day, "The psyche's alchemy is complete when resentment turns into understanding. Understanding doesn't mean reconciliation. It means the emotional neutrality that allows love without participation." She could wish her parents well without re-entering their illusions. That neutrality is what Jung called psychic hygiene compassion that doesn't compromise reality. You can forgive them, he told her, because you're no longer asking them to be different. Forgiveness is not permission, it's release. Years later, she would describe that period as the calm after the storm, but Jung preferred a different metaphor. It's not after, he said. It's beneath. The calm was always there. You just had to dig through generations of noise to find it. And when she finally touched that stillness, she understood the paradox of the black sheep's journey. The exile becomes the shepherd. By leaving the flock that feeds on illusion, she becomes capable of guiding others to reality. Every family, Jung said, hides a single consciousness strong enough to metabolize its collective shadow. That person will be cast out until the shadow collapses. Only then will they recognize the exile as the healer they tried to destroy. The task of the black sheep is to survive long enough for history to catch up. By the 4th year, Jung said something that would stay with her for the rest of her life. Every family's survival depends on one member refusing to pretend. He called it the law of renewal. When a system becomes too invested in its illusions, one consciousness is chosen by temperament, by trauma, by soul, to bear the cost of truth. That person becomes what the lineage cannot digest, the anomaly, the breaker, the exile. But he added, the anomaly is also the next version of the family trying to be born. For the black sheep, this realization rewrites the past. Every rejection becomes record of her necessity. The things she was punished for, feeling too much, seeing too far, speaking too clearly, were never defects. They were evolutionary functions. She was the mutation that made adaptation possible. Families call it rebellion. Biology calls it survival. Jung noted that the psyche operates by the same principle. It sacrifices the stability of falsehood to protect the integrity of life. When denial becomes lethal, the unconscious selects an organ of awareness, one person, to manifest the symptoms truth demands. The family calls that person broken. In reality, they're the body trying to heal. Once she grasped this, guilt lost its power. Guilt, she realized, was the leash that kept her orbiting a dying system. It whispered, "If you leave, you abandon us." But she could finally see the reversal. Staying would have been the real abandonment of herself, of the future of every ancestor who tried and failed to escape. Her leaving was fidelity to the living. Jung called this moral inversion, when what looks like betrayal from the outside is actually devotion from the inside out. Her new life was simple. She taught, she wrote, she gardened. The nervous system that once vibrated with hypervigilance now vibrated with awareness. She could feel the weather shift before storms, sense tension before words. The same sensitivity that once broke her had become intuition, uncorrupted by fear. In solitude, she found a kind of peace that didn't depend on anyone's understanding. "I used to think love was agreement," she wrote in her journal. "Now I see love is truth without disguise." Years passed. Letters stopped. Holidays came and went. One day, she received a photograph of her niece, a young woman holding a book she had written. On the inside cover, the niece had written, "Thank you for showing me what freedom looks like." That was the moment she realized liberation doesn't always announce itself in reconciliations. Sometimes it arrives as continuation. She was no longer the black sheep. She was the ancestor of a different lineage. Jung recorded their final session in his diary. She smiled, he wrote, not with triumph, but with comprehension. He told her, "You have completed the cycle. The immune system has restored integrity to the organism. Even if they never call, the work is done." She replied, "I don't need them to see me anymore. I see them now with compassion, not illusion. Jung's final note on her case reads, "The black sheep is not a role but an evolutionary stage. When consciousness evolves, someone must carry the first light through darkness. That is the paradox every family forgets. The one they exile is the one they depend on. The truth-teller who ruins the gathering preserves the lineage. The boundary setter who destroys Christmas saves the future from becoming the past. The silence breaker ensures the story continues. And though the family may never thank them, life itself does by replicating their courage in whoever comes next. If you've worn that role, remember what it means. You are not the malfunction of your family. You are its next possibility. The sensitivity you were told to dull is the radar that detects corruption before it spreads. The anger you were taught to suppress is clarity under pressure. The loneliness you carry is the space evolution leaves around those who walk ahead of their time. You are not too much. You are enough to end what should have ended generations ago. The mechanisms complete their circle: immune system, scapegoat, destabilizer, pattern, breaker, liberator. Together they describe the transformation of truth inside a field of denial. You were never designed to fit the pattern, you were designed to finish it. The pain of exile was the doorway through which a new consciousness entered your bloodline. Because of you, someone else will live differently, love differently, speak sooner, break earlier, and heal faster. So if your family calls you the problem, remember what Jung told Anna in 1932. You are the immune system. You are the proof that the body still wants to live. Let that be your final inheritance, the knowledge that awakening is not rebellion, but repair. And when the silence feels heavy, know that across every generation, every culture, there have been others like you, black sheep turned shepherds, standing outside their own houses, of denial, breathing clean air for the first time. The family may never understand the gift you gave them, but existence does. Evolution does. And every time another soul refuses to lie, your work continues. Stay awake, stay kind. You're not broken, you're the cure. See you in the next dimension.